And welcome back. Comments made by radio talk show host Michael Savage about autistic children has not only sparked controversy, but it has continued to shed light on a very serious issue here in the Garden State. And with a bill requiring health care insurance for evidence-based autism treatment, the topic has triggered yet another form of debate. Joining me right now, Leslie Long, who is Director of Public Policy for the Center of Outreach and Services for the Autism Community, and also Gregg Edwards, who is President of the Center for Policy Research of New Jersey. First, let me get your reaction to what Michael Savage said. He said that nearly every child with autism was a brat of inattentive parents. He kind of backpedaled a little bit later on, the day after, but what's your reaction to that?
Well, clearly uninformed opinion, and a lot of people were upset about his comments. In fact, I had some people call me up and say, "You have to listen, he's going on again." So I turned on the radio, and what struck me, besides how ill-informed the man is how boring he is on radio. I tried to listen and literally could not get past a minute. So unlikable, opinionated, that is ill-informed, but I don't even like giving credence to the comments. They're so...
Well, he later on backpedaled, and partially backpedaled, I guess I should say, and said that he was talking about the children that weren't diagnosed properly with autism.
Yeah, and actually, I think he made a great argument for why we need insurance coverage in the state of New Jersey and across the country, why we need diagnosis, better diagnosis, and treatment. So, in fact, I think the awareness it created will allow us to see better diagnosis and appropriate treatment. So, for somebody, again, who got so much attention for such unfounded information, I think we should use it for the good of people with autism.
Well, in the state of New Jersey, it's not covered, autism, right? It's partially covered, it's kind of in a gray area. How does it work?
Well, it might be covered. It's not a mandated benefit. There's not a requirement that says you have to cover it. Whether or not it's covered is a matter between the insurance company and the insured who has a policy.
Okay, so a lot of states do cover it, though, right?
There's now about 8 states that passed health care legislation. In New Jersey, we do have mental health parity, and children with autism should not be discriminated against by not getting benefits covered in their health insurance. We believe that children with autism are not being treated equally in health benefits, and that's why this legislation is proposed, that it is not up to the insurance companies, that if an individual is diagnosed on the autism spectrum, they have a medical need for intervention. And that's what this particular healthcare legislation supports.
Well, but isn't the diagnosis, though, itself a pretty broad diagnosis? I mean, autism, and I'm not comparing the two necessarily, but I mean, there was a diagnosis of schizophrenia. Well, that was like this huge, broad, different...
Right, it's a spectrum disorder.
Yeah.
And clearly a spectrum disorder, although there are similarities in the symptoms that have behavioral, communication, and social consequences to them, it is a spectrum disorder. So you can have individuals that have very high IQs that fall into the diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome, and individuals that have that may fall into the range of cognitive impairment. So it is a spectrum disorder, and I think that if you talk to anybody with autism spectrum disorder, they would tell you it is only meeting one individual, and it's such an individualized spectrum disorder. It should be the doctor's recommendation on what the treatment is, and it should be mandated coverage.
But what would this do to insurance?
Yeah, well, therein lies the problem, I think, Harry. I think, frankly, that state lawmakers have a choice to make, and it's really between two things. One is, do we have health insurance policies that are affordable for the public, generally speaking? Or do we have a Cadillac insurance policy that would be very nice if you could afford it, but if you can't afford it, then you don't have any coverage at all? And unfortunately, that's what we have in this state today. We have a heavily mandated insurance policy that is very expensive. If not the most expensive, it's certainly one of the most expensive policies in the country. And therefore, Harry, a lot of people cannot afford to buy it. And the fact is that mandates, benefit mandates, do add to the cost.
In fact, I just have to take issue with that comment that in the states that have implemented healthcare legislation for individuals on the autism spectrum, it is an under 2% increase. And in fact, a constituent said to me recently that the cost for a Starbucks coffee would be the cost of covering a child with mandated benefits.
Leslie, though, there are 42 mandates, 42 right now in the state of New Jersey. So yes, any one mandate may not cost a lot, but when you add up the cost of all the mandates, that's how we get to these premiums that are not affordable to folks. Look, if you had a job and state government said to you, you can either walk or you can buy this Cadillac to get there, and you said, wait a minute, I can't walk 10 miles to the job and I can't afford the Cadillac. That's a ridiculous choice to make me do, and that's what we do in health insurance. It says you have to buy the most expensive or you get nothing at all.
We're not talking about a Cadillac, we're talking about tires to the car. You can't drive the car if you don't have tires.
Let people decide that, though. Why can't people decide what they want in their health care?
And I think that you do not choose to have a child with autism, but you choose your health care policy. When your child is born, you expect that health care insurance will cover the cost for your child to be cared for in a medically necessary way.
But if I'm single, why should I be compelled to buy a policy that covers me for something I'm not going to need?
I mean, I think we had a discussion about health care insurance, and in doing some of this research, I read that women have to be covered for prostate cancer. Is that correct? Or did I misread that?
Yeah, and I don't think that's a public choice. I think that, you know, you buy life insurance hoping you don't die early.
Right. But did I misstate that fact?
No, you didn't. And in fact, if you're single, you have to buy health insurance that covers infertility treatments. It doesn't make sense.
Okay, but that's the way it's mandated in the state of New Jersey. Now, here's my problem with this, Leslie. How does this get linked into autism? Because I don't think anybody out there in their right mind would say, hey, if you have an autistic child, you don't get health insurance.
Right.
You don't get covered.
But that's what we are saying. In fact, there are hundreds of parents that have contacted our office that have been turned down by health insurance companies with an exclusion of autism-based health insurance coverage. We are saying to families, you don't have a choice. We're not going to cover your child's treatment. And that is not a choice that I think New Jersey taxpayers would make. In fact, when it costs as little as under 1% for family or single coverage, I don't think we'd want to make the choice to not cover what's medically necessary.
So now, Pennsylvania has more of an a la carte kind of health insurance. Why doesn't Jersey? Why don't we?
Well, we ought to have more of a la carte, and I would argue that that would help make it more affordable for folks. And then if you're starting a family, you can decide, well, I think maybe I want to be covered for autism, so we ought to attach that as a rider to the policy. But if I'm single, I don't have a family, I don't need it. There might be other things that are more important to me in health insurance.
Well,
okay, go ahead, Liz.
I would hope that nothing is more important than treating the most vulnerable citizens in our society. 1 in 94 children are on the autism spectrum. This is a cost that New Jersey is incurring. Are we going to invest in people and make sure that they become contributing taxpayers to the community, or are we going to not, and it's going to cost us more in the long run?
All right, Leslie Long, Gregg Edwards, thank you very much for joining us. We'll have to leave it there. Any ideas about the show that you'd like to see discussed here? Please log on to my9tv.com. Click on Public Affairs. We would just love to hear from you. That's it for today's show. Thank you very much for joining us. For My 9, I'm Harry Martin. We'll see you next week.